going to speak about risk management and best practices. And we are going to do so with another panel of very high-level experts from several and different countries from the Americas. Luckily for us, our moderator is Cecilia Bente, partner at Bente Stewart Abogados in Paraguay, that is now joining us. How, Cecilia? Together with another guest speaker, which is Isaac Morales, Managing Director and of Cybersecurity and Privacy Communications for Latin America at FTI Consulting, together with the two more members of the PrivacyRules Alliance, which are Paulina Silva, partner at BitLaw in Chile and colleague of the partner we had in the call before, it was Tomas, and Joan Manuel Pitaluga, partner at Pitaluga Abogados in Uruguay. So another great panel, a lot of experts from different countries and from different sectors for our audience. Tessie, I leave the floor to you, and thank you all again for being with us and also for this session.
Perfect. Thank you, Alessandro. Good afternoon and welcome to the last session. Thank you for staying here until the end. Now we are going to talk about risk management and best practices for biometric data. Before we begin, let me briefly explain the format of this session. I will be moderating the discussion and will also share some insights from my jurisdiction. And then we will move into a conversation with our speakers, and we will all be answering some questions regarding this subject. So first of all, I would like to start with a general landscape of biometric regulation in each jurisdiction. So I leave the floor to Paulina.
Thanks so much, Cecilia, and thanks, PrivacyRules, for this invitation. Well, Chile. We're going to talk a little bit about Chile. The main framework governing the processing of biometric data is in our new data protection law. And I say new data protection law because it is actually not even unforeseeable yet. It'll become unforeseeable on the 1st of December next year, after a very long time of discussion before Congress. This law was being discussed for 7 years. And it was published last year, and it regulates, as foreseeable, it regulates biometric identification for the first time. This represents a significant shift. We did have an older law that is currently unforeseeable, did not expressly regulate in any form biometric data, only lightly it would regulate sensitive data. This new law directly addresses this issue and incorporates for the first time both a definition and a specific regulatory regime, which resembles GDPR very much, as also expected. So under our new data protection law, biometric data is first classified as a type of sensitive data. When the law defines sensitive data, mainly through examples, it includes biometric data, but then it defines it. And it refers to data being obtained first from a specific technical processing, and it must relate to physical, physiological, or behavioral characteristics of a person, and it must allow for a unique identification of that person, and then it gives out examples like fingerprint, iris, hand features, facial features, voice. The law is very explicit regarding the general rule for processing biometric data, which, no surprise there, it's express consent from the data subject. And it also adds on top of it a specific information requirement where the data controller must clearly disclose and this will, of course, usually live in the privacy policy, the specific biometric system that it's used, the purpose, the period for which the data will be used, and how the individuals may exercise the right. These are very narrow. They relate to life or physical integrity when it's at stake, public health alerts, certain very specific scenarios of scientific research carried out in the public interest. But always the underlying principle is the same. If there's a less intrusive way to achieve the intended purpose, biometric data should not be used generally, and if it is, it should be associated with a PIA. At the end of the day, the legislator's message is if you're going to use biometrics, demonstrate why is it necessary, how you will protect the data, which safeguards are you using. And then for organizations, this translates, of course, into a higher standard of governance, which is and security and risk assessment, which is completely new to the Chilean landscape as we knew it in the last 20 years. There's a law authorizing biometric authentication on airports that provides a clear framework for the police to use this kind of tool. There's specific telecommunication regulations regarding identity verification requirements through biometric systems as well. And in practice, I would like to close saying that these norms usually enable the processing of biometric data on those very specific cases and limit the purposes for which the data may be used. But everything else, security, proportionality, transparency, respect for the data subject rights remains governed by this new personal data protection law.
Perfect. Thank you, Paulina. Very interesting. So I leave the floor now to Manuel.
Thank you, Ceci. Hi, everyone. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Uruguay. In Uruguay, the use of biometric data operates under a strong regulatory framework. The law 18331 and its amendments classify biometric data as sensitive data requiring enhanced safeguards. The national authority, URCDP, oversees compliance and generally mandates a data protection impact assessment before deploying any biometric system, okay? Uruguay also follows international standards, as for example, the Europe's Convention 108 Plus, reflecting a high level of alignment with global data protection regulations. And the main challenge in our country is make a balance between individual rights and innovation. Biometric data is unique, so any branch can have permanent consequences. And the common uses here in Uruguay of biometric data include digital identity, access control in financial services, healthcare services, and government procedures. And one more thing, in Uruguay, there is a big public debate about facial recognition in public security, because it demands transparency and proportionality. So there is here a big debate between in the government and with the people.
Thank you, Manuel. I'm going to talk about Paraguay now. So Paraguay has recently taken a decisive step toward a modern personal data protection framework with the enactment of the law 7593 from 2025. This law is on personal data protection and aligns our country to international data protection standards, finally. Although this law does not regulate biometrics in a chapter, this biometric data clearly falls under the category of sensitive data, meaning that they are subject to enhanced safeguards, stricter legal basis, and higher compliance expectations. So this new law follows a risk-based and an accountability-driven approach, requiring organizations to, first of all, justify the necessity of biometric processing, then the application of the principle of proportionality, and also the implementation of technical and organizational security measures, and the conducting DPIAs when processing involves high risk processing, and which is typically the case of biometric data. So another important element is the upcoming creation of an independent data protection authority, which will likely play a key role in issuing guidance and interpreting this biometric use in the practice, right? So summarizing, Paraguay has now a legal framework capable of governing this biometric processing, but the implementation, regulatory guidance, and enforcement will be critical, and if it is used responsibly in the coming years. So now I leave the floor to Isaac. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. And first of all, just let me to thank the organizers for all these sessions, and particularly to invite us to this panel. It's great to be with all of you. Well, I will mention first Mexico. I mean, as the jurisdiction where I'm right now posed. In Mexico, it is, as in the most of the countries in the region, in Latin America and the Caribbean, the biometrics, it is in a more general understanding under the framework of the very well placed and very implemented and very known national data protection law. Which is relevant right here, as it was mentioned by Paulina and Manuel and yourself. It is biometrics considering only data. I mean, the element of data. Nevertheless, this general data protection law doesn't cover elements related to the technology. I mean, the technology behind the creation and the interaction and storaging of the biometrics. So what is seen recently here in Mexico, it's also some concrete developments, but I will say sectorized developments, like sector by sectors. And for instance, right there, considering banking and finance institutions and regulation are more developed in those lines, because the technology, the banks need then to keep all this data, biometrics, under the standards and the elements considered secure and protected, are more developed, more detailed than other sectors. Recently, as is in other countries, as it was mentioned also, we have had here in Mexico some discussions because of the advancements of some concrete laws, concrete regulations, allowing, for instance, public safety institutions to access to biometrics because of the judicial processes, because of the investigations, because of all the elements related to law enforcement. Of course, right there, the key element, I do believe, is understand the balance between accessing to this information and keeping, of course, under the framework of the data protection in general, and particularly with the elements sector by sector. And more recently, some discussions also related to digital identity, which I think is now an additional layer to the discussion on biometrics in general. Here in Mexico, the recently created agency for digital transformation, they have enhancing many systems, including the possibility to have a new national digital identity, where biometrics, I mean, it's the same identity we do have, but with additional, I mean, the photo, and then some digital footprints, etc., etc. So these are recent conversations. Nevertheless, there is no a very single one element or regulation basically ruling all what biometrics and, again, the technology behind biometrics needs. If you allow me, beyond Mexico, I just wanted to share a couple of elements or ideas with regards to more international and broader conversations. And right there, I do believe, even when biometrics and the discussions to regulate all this is not new, sincerely, which is clearly new, is biometrics as a new borderline conversation. And that borderline conversation, it's from one side included as a topic of data protection, of course, and privacy discussions, but as well as cybersecurity and security by design concerns. And right there, some consideration on the advancement of ethical and responsible use of the technology has been taken into account at the international level. And for instance, recent discussions at the United Nations and other international organizations, multilateral organizations, had put on the table this consideration as a hot topic to consider emerging technologies, particularly associated to critical infrastructure and blockchain, for instance, as elements related clearly to biometrics advancements. And right there, I only add to consider also some recent international standards. For instance, the ISO, the International Standard Organization, developing the ISO standard related to biometrics more recently last year, with aims not only to consider the data, but actually the architecture of the systems of biometrics. So I will say that it will be good that our region in Latin America, to look at those very recent advancements, also to consider not only the data itself, but actually the architecture behind.
Thank you, Isaac. Very, very interesting what you mentioned. And now I will go to make some questions to our speakers. Paulina, you're first. And the first question is, why do biometric data require stronger safeguards than other types of personal data?
When we discuss why biometric data requires these stronger safeguards, the explanation, the initial explanation at least, is fairly intuitive, right? Biometric data cannot be changed. If a password is leaked, we can change it. If a card is compromised, we can block it. But if it's a person's face, my fingerprint, my iris, if that's exposed, there is no possible replacement for that element. That permanence and the impossibility of renewal mean that any security incident can have irreversible effects on a person. And this by itself justifies a much higher level of protection. But also, biometric identification is unequivocal. My digital print only identifies me, no one else. You would usually need more than one piece of data, non-biometric data, to associate it with an individual. Paulina Silva, lawyer, Chilean, in her 40s, several pieces of information, but not with biometric identification. Another key factor is that there is a risk of discrimination and bias. Biometric systems, like most software, have error rates, but these errors, the errors that may arise in the processing of biometric data are far from trivial, because they can result in arbitrary discrimination related to gender, to age, to phenotypic characteristics of the data subject. And this becomes even more serious if the system makes automated decision. And for that reason, safeguards must be significantly more robust and demanding than regarding non-biometric data. And also closely related to this is the fact that biometric data enables inferences. So from the analysis of a face or an iris, it is possible or it's easier to infer things such as the approximate age, emotional state, behavior patterns, even health indicators. And this, of course, opens the door to secondary uses and data processing activities that fall entirely outside of the data subject's expectations. There is also an increasingly relevant risk in today's public debate, which is the potential of biometric technologies to enable mass surveillance. Technologies such as facial recognition makes it possible to identify individuals in real time, even without their knowledge, even without our knowledge. And this not only affects privacy, it impacts freedom of expression, the right to protest, the ability to move out anonymously. It compromises democracy at the end of the day, or it may compromise democracy at the end of the day. among other, rights and freedoms. And so for this reason, regulation must necessarily be stricter and more protective regarding this specific type of information. When we consider all these factors together, permanence, potential discrimination, inequivocability, inferential capacity, and surveillance risks, it is fairly easier to conclude that biometric data requires reinforced safeguards.
Perfect. Thank you, Paulina. And now I'm turning to you, Manuel. And can you tell me what are the risks organizations have when implementing biometric systems? Manuel? Do you hear me?
Yes, now yes. Yes.
Okay, perfect. There you
Yes.
go.
Okay, yes, of course. In Uruguay, implementing biometric systems carries several significant risks that organizations must handle carefully. One of those risks is the legal risk, since biometric data is classified as sensitive under the law, as I told before. This means organizations must clearly justify the need for biometrics. They have to conduct mandatory data protection impact assessment and register the database with the URCDP. Failing to do so can result in sanctions or legal claims. The other risk is the security, of course. If biometric data is leaked, a breach can create permanent identity risks for individuals and serious reputational damage for the organizations. And there is also a risk of disproportionate or unnecessary use, especially when biometrics are implemented without really necessity or without offering different alternatives. Other risks are technological errors or bias in facial recognition, reliance on external vendors who may process data abroad or under weaker safeguards, and ethical and reputational risks. For these reasons, implementation of must always be proportional, transparent, and supported by strong security measures.
Are you there, Ceci?
Ceci?
I'm gonna jump to the next question for Isaac.
Yes.
So Isaac,
Sorry.
Yeah, I
It was
can.
my internet. Now I'm back. Sorry. So I'm turning
All
to
right.
you, Isaac. Do you hear me? Yes, right?
Yes,
And
don't
I'm
worry.
I'm asking the same question. What are the risks organizations have when implementing biometric systems? And also, I would like to add, how can compliance requirement be embedded into operational security and reputational risk control rather than treated as isolated legal task?
Sure. Thank you very much for the question, and I'm completely aligned with Manuel's comment and the points he put on the table. But I will add also that considering risks beyond the legal risk and of course the cyber security and the technology-based related security. The reputational side, the elements related to reputation, the communication, and the way to communicate inside the organizations and beyond the organizations, that this concrete organization is capable to storage and to protect and to manage biometrics, it is key. So as part of the risk-based approach, and thanks for the question, because basically from my point of view, the risk-based approach is a key element then to advance in the adoption of biometric system, or in the updating basically also biometric systems. Under this risk-based approach, I will add this layer of reputational communicational element. Sometimes when you face some breaches, data breaches, it has been mentioned, it is really clear that it is the organization, but in particular the data thread. In this case, the element of the continuity of the processes and to manage the crisis needs additional elements related to reputational responses and communication responses because of the sensitiveness of the data of all biometrics. Um, Storaging the data, biometrics data, also it's a key element to consider from the risk-based approach. And when I say storaging, is both like a storaging from a digital domain understanding, but also storaging because in the end, all this data are storage in data centers, localized in a very concrete jurisdiction, etc. So having clear idea, not only getting the technology, not only getting the service, the software, but actually knowing perfectly which is the last place, though that those places in concrete jurisdiction, the concrete jurisdictions, etc., it is key to consider the development, updating, and advancement of biometrics systems. And from a compliance approach, of course, responses are needed not only, and measures are needed not only from legal, from a very clear legal approach, but also from a more security approach, and I will say like an inter area, like a multidimensional understanding of compliance, where also scrutiny from relevant stakeholders, not only authorities, but investors, customers, etc., are increased. I mean, scrutiny, of course, is one of the elements that once you have biometric data, it is clearly increased. So monitoring that kind of scrutiny as part of our compliance approach, it is also recommended. And particularly having a very well structured and very well documented track to manage any kind of crisis related to biometrics is part of the elements of not necessarily compliance, but enhance compliance, like going beyond what we are commonly mentioned as compliance. I will add those layers in this case.
Excellent. Thank you. I believe Paulina has a question for me now.
I have a question for you, Ceci.
Okay, great.
So, let us know from a risk management perspective, what safeguards do you think should be considered non-negotiable?
Yes, so from that perspective, I believe there are certain safeguards that should be considered, as you mentioned, not negotiable. One of that is the lawful basis and purpose limitation. As we were mentioning, every processing activity must have a clear legal basis and a very defined and legitimate purpose, because data should not be collected just in case, it should be collected only on those bases. And there's also the data minimization by design, which is the collection of data that is strictly necessary. If the purpose can be fulfilled without this sensitive data or biometrics data, that option should always be the one that is preferred. And also, interesting topic is the privacy by design and by default, which I think we have a question that we will answer at the end of the panel. And that I'm just saying that these safeguards must be embedded, as mentioned Isaac, from the beginning, not at later in a late stage of the product or service. And these systems should be considered or configured to operate with the highest privacy settings by default, as their name says. And also, I believe that the risk assessments before the deployment is very, very important, because this high risk processing should always undergo with a prior impact or risk assessment to identify and mitigate potential harms before going live. And also, as you mentioned, the robust security measures that may include encryptions, access controls, logins, and regular security testing, which is I would like to add that security is not only technical, it's also having clear internal policies, also staff training, which is very, very important also, not only the technical part, which is of course very important, but also the other documented things that is not that very easy to see, but we lawyers do know that exist and they're very important. And just finally, one comment more, it's about transparency. Individuals must understand what data is being collected and for what purpose, and how these decisions should be or will be affecting them, especially when these systems are involved, and also because of the data, as Paulina mentioned in her examples. It's very, very important because it identifies ourselves, and there's no another CECI yet, at least. So very, very important. And just the last comment, the human oversight, which I believe it's very important. Human must review this built in the process, which I know this is an AI era, but do not forget that we still have control and have the chance to have this oversight as human beings. So that's, I think, I believe that's it. And I think we have just like 5 minutes, so I would like to just the final round and final comment, and ask you, Paulina, about the best practices and uses cases in your jurisdiction regarding, of course, the biometrics and risk management. And then we will answer the questions.
All right.
Thank
So
you.
in anticipation of I'll try to make it short and sweet. In anticipation of the entry into force of our new data protection law, we're seeing good practices in the processing of biometric data, and we're truly seeing that they're making a real difference here in Chile. We have a lot of work as privacy lawyers, which is good news. We're seeing organizations that are not merely trying to comply, but are instead seeking to anticipate these strengthened standards that the new law will require, and they are incorporating practices like conducting privacy impact assessments, documenting specific controls, including or structuring alive privacy risk matrices, supply classification criteria. We're seeing that a lot. That classification criteria for vendors that will process personal data, which is conducted, of course, ex ante, not ex post. More robust security policies. So altogether, these developments reflect a very important culture shift that we thought would never happen, actually, after all that long discussion before Congress of the new law. And this shift relates to more responsible design from the outset, and a preventive approach to risk management. In this context, recent Chilean use cases show how this logic is being applied in practice, and what are those challenges. For example, I was referring to the Undersecretariat of Telecommunications that implemented a regulation requiring telecommunication companies to verify users' identities through biometric data to prevent fraudulent number portability and identity theft, while at the same time imposing high standards for data protection. Regarding airports, again, a specific law authorizes the investigations police to use biometric technology to verify the identity of passengers on domestic flights. And this illustrates and has illustrated common tensions. While the security purpose is legitimate, questions have arisen regarding the proportionality, the necessity of using multiple types of biometrics, what enhanced security measures are required, are they actually being applied, given the sensitivity of this processing. Finally, the biometric registration process for foreign national in irregular situations led by the immigration authority, which is becoming a large issue in this country, and also led by the investigations police, shows how these systems are being used for public policy and national security purposes, reinforcing the need for strict controls when processing biometric data. So taken together, these examples show a pattern that begins to be somehow consistent. Strong biometric projects stand out because the technology genuinely adds value. There should be a clear justification for its use. Risks are beginning to be assessed prior to implementation, and robust measures of security, proportionality, transparency are starting to get adopted. And this conversation is just beginning to take shape in Chile as well, how to use biometrics with risk-based, rights-based, and a responsibility designed approach.
Perfect. Thank you, Paulina. Great way to end these discussions, and we will have some questions. So I'm reading the first one. It says, how can companies effectively conduct risk assessments for biometric systems, especially when these technologies evolve faster than regulations?
I can get that.
Yeah, perfect. You do it, please.
So I think these are just suggestions, right? Because it's a very hard questions. I would think that there are different sort of verticals in which you could work. You should consider dual risk lens, technical and societal, because biometrics require a look beyond cybersecurity. So from the technical point of view, currency failures, model drifts, vendor risks, look at that part of the biometrics. And from a societal point of view, check your bias, consent problems, surveillance concerns, which also relate to the legal perspective, right? The risk assessment should be a continuous exercise, not just a one-time exercise. And in the world of compliance, I see this happening more and more, where compliance sort of from a company, it has the risk of becoming just, a checkbox, an infinite amount of checkboxes. If this risk assessment is not continuous, it'll be as useful as the time that it's valid for, and then you'll have nothing, right? The biometric models also evolve very quickly, so you should use a rolling cycle where you identify data flows, you analyze the threats, you mitigate those threats, and then you keep monitoring, and then do it all over again. You should use established frameworks and build also this. I know this sounds like a lot of lip service, but you need to build cross-functional governance, right? To include security, privacy, legal, engineers, ethics, operations, because it just like everything else in the privacy realm, it is just very transversal. The impact within the companies, it's truly transversal, and then you're not off the hook if you're just talking to marketing, or if you're just talking to legal, or just talking to the CISO. This is what I can come out with for this question.
Excellent. Thank you, Paulina. Do you want to add something, Isaac? Or we're just going to the next?
Yeah, sure. No, absolutely. I agree with Paulina. And I will say that perhaps it's also relevant to consider. Sometimes we talk about a biometric like in singular, like a biometric system, but we do need to take into account in any compliance effort, any risk assessment, that we are in front of biometric systems in plural and biometrics in plural, which is relevant then to consider in those risk assessment, in those elements related to compliance, interoperability. I have been involved in many crises, managing many crises related not necessarily to a breach, but a problem of interoperability. So when introducing new technologies, when transitioning from a more technological level, sometimes we are very aware, and we take into account all the legal elements, but the technology side, it's not necessarily with the same detail. That is why I will emphasize, consider biometrics both always like data, and all the related needs to protect the data, and also as a technology or technology-based approach. Then having these two elements, we will have a robust risk assessments and enhance compliance efforts.
Excellent. So we ran out of time. So thank you very much for participating with the questions, and also you, the speakers. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And hope we have a next session, virtual session again soon. And thank you very much for everything.
Pleasure to see you guys. Thanks for everything.
Thank you, Susie. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.